So King County Elections Director Julie Weiss, she continues to stoke and fuel election conspiracies by her weird and strange behavior this past primary election in Washington state. So now our video from last week, it addressed the initial story, but the story just won't end. And the lack of transparency, the Epstein cameras, the lawyering up, the concealment, the redactions, and just all the rest of this drama, this just continues to unfold in King County, and it really isn't looking better. For those who kind of missed our last video, I encourage you to watch it, and of course I'll link to it down below, but here's basically the brief recap. During Washington State's August primary election month, and I call it a month, in August of this year, just a few months ago, in King County, the largest county in Washington State, which includes Seattle, Bellevue, Kent, Redmond, and just a large percentage of the state population. In fact, 37.4% of all ballots cast in the state of Washington, they're handled in just one building in King County. Now, Julie Weiss's sole job as the elected director of King County elections is to get this one job right? Do the elections. However, in what appears to be an unfolding story of incompetence and secrecy, law-breaking, and concealment, Julie Weiss appears to be doing her best to convince the rest of the world that she has no idea how to run an election anywhere. Now, last week we discussed the super secret server swap, which was conducted by Julie Weiss. And this is the primary device, the main computer, that manages the tabulation of the all-mail-in ballot program in Washington State. Under Washington State's weird and dysfunctional all-mail-in ballot operation, a tabulation server, which is just a computer that it helps tabulate or kind of keep track of the count of the votes. This is actually a key component in the vote counting and processing. The primary computer used to do this job was tested under the watchful eye, as it needs to be, of election observers from both parties back in early July. Now, one of the primary tests is called a logic and accuracy test, or an LNA test, which is really just dropping a bunch of fake kind of pre-filled ballots into the hopper and then getting the correct result back from the machine. I actually don't think this is much of a test, but in election world, when they can get it to actually work, there's a big celebration at the elections office when they do the LNA test. So anyway, they did this back in early July. But when the ballots started trickling in for basically the month of ballot collection starting in late July, this primary server apparently failed. So Julie Weiss swapped the server with a backup server which had not been openly tested in the same way. And this was a fact that they kept secret it was actually kept secret by King County elections from the Republican Party in King County until about a week after the election. And it was only revealed at that time because Republican election observers noticed something fishy and they'd actually started to file records requests. I talked about this in the last video. Now then, when confronted by the King County Republican Party about why the secret server swap had been conducted out of sight from election observers, or even any attempt to follow the law, Julie Weiss just told them that she didn't need to do that. Now, this self-serving claim is in dispute as RCW, which is the Revised Code of Washington, so RCW 29A.12.130, and then WAC, which is a rule they're supposed to follow, 434.335-330. It appears to contradict this claim. But Washington State AG Bob Ferguson and Secretary of State Steve Hobbs' office are kind of stepping in to support Julie Weiss in her efforts to conceal the truth. Now, here's the official letter from Jim Walsh, who's the recently elected Washington State Republican Party chair, demanding that this issue be resolved. And I'm actually going to quote from this letter because I think it concisely indicates the concern that anyone who wants to even pretend that they care about open, honest, and fair elections, anyone who cares about this would agree. And I'm going to quote, "It is imperative to emphasize that the mid-election LNA test conducted by King County Elections in late July was an abbreviated test, falling short of the requirements outlined in WAC section 434.335-330 for testing a secondary tabulation server for the 2023 primary election. This, coupled with the absence of witnesses or functioning video cameras, casts doubt on the integrity of the election process in Washington and risks eroding voter confidence," unquote. Now listen, this just isn't a hard issue to understand, even for King County Elections Director Julie Weiss. She pretends that she cares about fair, honest, and open elections. But at every single turn, she has decided to initiate election conspiracy theories and she just can't help herself. So here's a little bit of advice freely given. If you have nothing to hide, then stop hiding things. I mean, seriously, you can look at the pages of heavily redacted information in the reply to the records request from her office. I mean, you can look at it for yourself. I'm going to link to that down below because there's a lot of documents there. But if Julie Weiss has nothing to hide, then she should stop hiding things. Even if she's legally allowed to hide it, why conceal it from the public when there is no harm in sharing the truth? Sure, her office might be a bit embarrassed because maybe it will expose some incompetence or screw-ups. But frankly, we're used to that. We know these guys screw up all the time. Just don't try to hide it from us. And the cover-up's always worse. Now, secondly, if you claim that you're being transparent, then stop Epsteining the cameras every time when something critical is supposedly happening. I mean, seriously, how the heck do you expect anyone outside of corrupt politicians and maybe the state-approved media like King 5 News to believe you when the cameras always seem to be conveniently Epsteined at just the right critical point in time? I mean, for those of you who've been living under a rock and don't understand what Epsteining a camera is, go to the video description below. I'll link to a story on that subject so you know more. But now back to Julie Weiss. If you have nothing to hide, then stop hiding things. I mean, there are plenty of Republican and Democrat election observers in King County. And I realize the Democrats may not care, but the Republican observers will certainly show up at a moment's notice when you're secretly swapping the most important piece of equipment in your entire office right in the middle of an election. They, at least, are certainly interested in observing this. And if you have nothing to hide, then don't hide it from the legally designated people who you are, in theory, supposed to observe. Now, if you're being transparent, then stop being opaque and hiding behind attorneys, Bob Ferguson's office, and other corrupt politicians. I mean, just come out and be honest and truthful about what your office is actually doing. Just don't hide it. Share it. And don't shred it. Share it. Don't fake it. Expose it. I mean, if you have nothing to hide, then show us what the heck you did. I mean, okay, so nobody, even those in a third world country, they wouldn't accept super secret server swaps in the middle of the night concealed from election observers without proper testing and without proper documentation and without cameras to prove any claims that they make. I mean, do we really need to demand an army of full-time international election observers from the United Nations to make sure that in Washington state we can have some type of reliability with our weird, month-long, strange election system? Now, this story just gets worse and worse the closer you look, and there's more to discuss in the future on the stories that kind of go back and forth here. So stay tuned, but in the meantime, it isn't too much for us to demand that our elections department act like something a modern, developed nation would accept. I mean, nobody from Zimbabwe, Venezuela, or any other country in the world would accept this weird, unobserved, and you can trust us even though we can't show you election fiasco. We need to demand that Julie Weiss gets her operation at least up to the level of a third world nation and get transparent and open about what her office is actually doing to the election process. We should demand that Julie Weiss stop Epsteining the cameras, stops hiding the truth from election observers, stops lawyering up, and start being transparent and open for a change. It isn't that hard to be honest and transparent, but it is very difficult to play hide the truth all the time. I mean, this isn't acceptable behavior for someone who has such an important job. Something is seriously wrong at the King County Elections Office, and it starts at the top. We can't be leaving election results in the hands of people who can't be trusted to be honest or remotely open with their department, their activity, or their actions. And before she shreds all the evidence of her actions, we need to know exactly what happened in July and August of this year. Now, we'll keep you posted on where the story goes. Until then, Julie Weiss can keep trying to create more election conspiracies, and we will show up to expose the truth. Because the future belongs to those who show up, and they certainly can't Epstein all of us.